that's working fine.
There we go. Cool. Hello, everyone. Right. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'm extremely happy, lucky, and plenty of other superlative to have Mr. Joe with me today. I've been a lucky man to having crossed Mr. Joe's life probably like 10, 20, 12 years ago now. And since then I've been following his progress and really enjoying, like, Joe delivers so good talks. Like, his talks are always funny, passionate, and like you learn a ton in a very short amount of time. So they are these kind of my favorite talks, basically. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping. So as you know, the Smart Cookies is short and sweet, hopefully. So it's like 20 minutes now of talks, and then we're going to have 10 minutes Q&A. Please make sure that if you want to ask questions, you ask them in the chat, but you move the chat to be to panelists and attendees. So everybody can see the chat and everybody can see the questions. After this event, Emily is going to be emailing you the kind of like follow-up email. You will have a chance to subscribe to the Cookies newsletter. You will also have a chance to rewatch this video on YouTube as we are recording it. So please remember to subscribe on YouTube or subscribe to the newsletter if you want to. But without further ado, I'm going to leave the microphone to Mr. Joe now, and I'm going to turn off my camera because I think it's like nicer, and I will try to not interject during the talk, but it's very, very difficult sometimes. So yes, without further ado, thank you very much, Joe, and over to you.
Morning, everybody. How are you all today? Ping me in the chat. Say hello. Where are you from? Where are you? Are you Bristol, beyond? Let me know where you are. Ping something into the chat to say hello. It's always nice to know. Hello, Bristol. Swansea. My wife's from near Swansea. Hello, come on, ping in the chat. Lots of Bristols. Hello. You can share it to attendees as well, to everybody. Oh, look, Mike. Hello. North Somerset. Indonesia. Look at that. I think you definitely win a few. We
are international, isn't it?
Bristol here. Hello, Hannah. Nice to see you. Hello. Keynsham. You would have won the furthest person away, Keynsham, but alas, Indonesia's beaten you to it. Well done, Kerry. Hello, Derek. Good to see you all. Close. All right. I always think that Keynsham is like the Indonesia of the Southwest, though. It's definitely my feeling of the place. Vietnam. Hey, Hui. Look at this. Very, very international. I did put a call out about a day or so ago saying to all my friends in Asia, if you wanted to join, it'd be a good time for you. So Sweden. Oh, hello. Lagos. Wow. Amazing. Oh, I'm honored to speak to you all here today. Great. Okay, let me share my screen and I'll give you an introduction to me and what I'm going to talk about today. So today then I'm going to talk to you a bit about a series of a podcast that I run, basically, and some insights that I've got from that podcast. So the journey started for me on this is that I advise organizations, startups, I coach startups, founders, scale-up founders, and executive leaders these days. And I help them to make better choices and decisions. And it always felt like a bit of a dark art to me. People were like, what's the best way to make a decision? What's the best way to decide what to do next? And there are many ways of doing it. But I felt that I didn't know enough. I felt there was got to be an answer to this out there. So I started a podcast, and this podcast was where I interviewed leaders from these large, successful businesses to understand how they made choices and decisions. So I've spoken to people from YouTube, Booking.com, WordPress, Monzo, Hitched, which is not worldwide, it's like a large wedding website, Delivery Hero, which is the world's largest food delivery network. It's not big in the UK, it's big everywhere else, big across Asia, across the world. Yesterday I spoke to the design director at Instagram. I've got another conversation coming up with the folks at Spotify. I'm just trying to really understand how people make the choices they make, what the decisions they do, how do they decide how to do it, what's their kind of secret sauce. And that's really, I started the podcast for my benefit because that's what I was interested in. And what I'm going to share with you today really are the themes from that podcast. And this is a really early draft. So I'm writing a book on this. And so you're seeing basically the earliest incarnation of what will be in that book. Some of the earlier themes that I'm starting to bring together now to start putting together some frameworks, some processes, some ways of working that you can use to make better decisions on the elements of your product, your website, and your app wherever you are in that journey. So let's look at some of the, I guess, the themes and what we're going to talk about today. So some of the things that I've started to realize is there's different types of decisions, classic strategic and tactical, but there's other types as well. We'll also talk a bit about ideas and inputs, what goes into a decision, the people in the organization and how that can help support making better decisions, and how equally that can really make it hard to make good decisions, as I'm sure you all know. Then we'll go into the point of making the decision. How is that done? What's the magic around that? Then, of course, we'll talk about the execution. What happens when it goes out there in the real world? What happens when it goes live? And also, of course, one of the key questions I ask on the podcast is what happens when it goes wrong? Because we all want to know. You see these perfect decisions out there. What happens when those decisions go wrong? How do companies cope with that? And that's the sort of situation. And then I'll kind of wrap up at the end with what is the secret sauce? What is it that these companies are doing, or these organizations are doing, to be successful in terms of decision making? And as Nick quite rightly said, if you've got any questions, put them into the chat over there and I'll answer them perhaps as I go, or more realistically at the end. All right, let's get going then, shall we? So what types of decisions are there? What was interesting about this is I spoke to Christian. Christian's head of research at YouTube. And they're often making either two types of decisions. He talks about additive decisions, so building new things, but he also talks about subtractive decisions as well, so taking things away. And this is something that large organizations, and especially Google, are very good at doing. They're great at building things, but they also take a lot of things away from us over the years. And that's obviously a decision. And I talked to Christian in episode 6 about this, and he talked about why and how these two types of decisions are important at Google, why they let things go, how they let things go, and how they plan and deal with that kind of stuff, which was really interesting. Then there's other kind of classical decision making, which is this sort of obviously the two sides, strategic versus tactical. And for me, strategic versus tactical decision making seemed on the surface of it quite straightforward and quite simple. But the more I asked people about this, it wasn't black and white which one of these things was which. What is a strategic decision? What is a tactical decision? What does that even mean? The difference between strategic and tactical? And I dug into this quite a lot with people. And what was interesting, so this is Selena. She runs the website The Knot, which is hitched to the world's largest wedding website. She's VP of product there. And they sort of talk about it in terms of initiatives and opportunities. So initiatives being large scale things they're doing, like an initiative might be, we're going to launch in Vietnam. An opportunity is going to be, we're launching in Vietnam. And then it's like looking at, well, what are the initiatives that go around that launch in Vietnam? So the large world is the opportunity. And the initiatives are, well, we need to build a team there. We need to do this. We need to do that. And they sort of break it out into these opportunities and then initiatives that come across these. It's interesting how they kind of talked about that as well. And then alongside that, they're constantly prioritizing for the customer and for the business all the way through this decision-making process. Then I spoke to Sally, who's CTO of an organization called Farewell. They deal with wills and death. Sally was also very senior at Monzo for many years and has been a very senior CTO for 15 years of her career. And they talk about a Kanban board for company strategy. In each quarter, anybody can submit what's known as a bet. And this opened my eyes to a whole world of decision-making that, again, Spotify use that I'm talking to them about coming up. And Spotify had this concept of, where I've talked about strategic and tactical, they had this idea of company bets. And company bets are very similar to the opportunities that they're not talk about. A company bet might be, again, we're going to launch in Nigeria. That's a company bet for us. We believe that there is work there for us. And then or for example, another company bet might be, we're going to get into podcasting, which is something Spotify have done. These are large scale, big strategic decisions. They call them company bets. And what I like about them calling them a bet is they are then attaching a certainty to if it's going to succeed or not. And with a bet, of course, you're going to win bets, but you're also going to lose bets. And what I like about this way of talking is that it doesn't imply that there is 100% certainty this is going to work. There's going to be risk associated with you launching in Nigeria. There's a lot of cost, there's a lot of effort, there's lots of other things going on with that bet. But on the balance of probabilities, bets can work really well in your favor. And this kind of comes from, again, the way Spotify work. It comes from some great work from a lady called Annie Duke, called Thinking in Bet. She's an ex-poker player who helps companies make decisions. And she talks a lot about how business is a lot like poker, where you bet on a possible outcome based on the evidence that you've got right now. And this has worked very well for Spotify. So they have these big company bets, but then alongside that, they have what they call functional bets. So these functional bets are small bits of functionality that match the company bet. So again, launching in Nigeria might mean that they've got to work on a certain mobile phone platform. They've got to build the functionality to do that. They might have to integrate with a certain payment provider. That's a functional bet associated with that company bet. And this is a great way of framing their larger decisions and grouping them together. This is the company bet we're doing here. These are the functional things around that we believe are going to lead to that success. All of them are mini experiments in themselves, but together they form a strategy and a higher level way of decision making. And I really like this format and this approach. And I'm going to ask Spotify in a couple of weeks, does this really work? Has this worked for you? So do subscribe to the podcast. There's some links coming soon, and you can learn about Spotify and how they do this as well. So that's the sort of types of decision-making stuff. The next things to talk about on that are kind of ideas and inputs. What are the inputs to these things? Classic inputs are from research is research data and insight. So you get things like, classically, this is from YouTube. They've got a vast amount of data, but they also are always running huge amounts of research with their audience. So classic quantitative data research and qualitative interviews, that kind of in-depth data to understand what people are feeling and thinking. But again, alongside that, the data is useful, but they have an overarching philosophy that directs them in a particular direction. This is where YouTube is going. This is where Google is going. This philosophy, this idea of what's behind the company that drives it. And that defines the direction. The data then supports that. And we see this again from Sally at CTO. They have Farewell, they have a company mission and the beliefs about where the market is going and what we should be doing in 3 to 5 years. That's their starting point of their inputs to kind of make the strategic making process. Booking.com. So I spoke to the fantastic Sarvesh there, who's VP of product at Booking.com. We focus on the problem space. They're similarly talking about what the problems are that's going to be happening there. They don't talk about competition. We're going to start to talk a bit about competition here. That's where they start to think about what the problem is they're trying to solve, and then look at competition to kind of sit around that. And WordPress as well. So again, how do WordPress do it? What are some of the inputs that are there? And again, talking about competition, it's important to keep an eye on the competition, but they're not obsessed by it. So when WordPress are deciding what they do, and again, WordPress powers a third of the internet. So a lot of the way that they make choices and decisions is not around competition. It's around what's going on in terms of the world around them and the problem space that they're uncovering from data. Again, more about competition. If you feature chase, you'll always be behind. That's one of the big defining features of a lot of these big organizations is they keep an eye on the competition, but they're not defined by it. Their decision-making, their inputs are not about competition. They're not. They keep an eye on them, but then they don't, it's not what drives them forward. Oh no, our competition has launched this, we must do this. They're not in that cycle of keeping up. They're in cycle of leading, which is extremely interesting about how they do that really. And let's talk about that in a bit more. So the competition is, this is interesting again from the Knot, and I love this quote. This is really good. So we think about the competition as an experiment, another experimental platform, but the team is not very friendly and refuses to share data. So we're doing these bets. So there's, the Knot are doing these experiments about the market, and so is the competition. And you've got to keep an eye on what they're doing. They're just not sharing the data with you to understand if that's been successful or not. That's a really interesting way to think about and frame the competition. So in looking at these organizations, then I've started to map out what their inputs are to make decisions. Okay, we've talked about data. From Christian from YouTube talked about that. Spotify, huge on that. Again, they're also huge on user research, insights, qualitative research to help understand what's going on. They've got 2 points of this diamond. They talk then also about business drivers. There's a business driver there, these company bets. What's the drive pushing you forward in that market? Is it expansion? Is it growth? What's your North Star metric? There's these 3 things at the top here, the business driver, the data, and the user research that gets you there. And then the 4th thing, which is also talked about quite heavily amongst leadership, is gut feel. What feels like the next best thing we should be doing? What feels like the thing we're doing? And the way I've tried to put these together into this decision diamond is this is a simple way of deciding if you should do something or not, or you should take something forward. So if a decision has 2 points on this diamond, so if there's data there and there's gut feel, this feels like the right thing, yeah, great, that sounds like a good idea. If you've got data, you've got gut feel, and it's a business driver, it's got 3 points on the diamond, really do it, okay? If it's got 4 points on that diamond, data, business driver, user research, and gut feel, absolutely get on and do that right now. Everything is pushing you in that direction. And where I see weaknesses in decision making is when there's only one of these items on the diamond. There's only data, there's only user research, there's only business driver, or the worst of all, there's only gut feel about what we should do next. If there's just gut feel about what this should be, it's a dangerous place to be. And that's where decisions fail, when there's only 1 point on the decision diamond that's been met. So this is a simple way that I've come up with to help frame how to make decisions going forward in an organization. Simple, sketch it on a whiteboard, sketch it in a Miro board. Very, very straightforward for you to start going ahead and using this. And I've written a bit of a blog post there about how that can work for you. Okay, let's keep going then. Point 3. The people in the organization. And this is the point where, again, things can start to fall apart in decision making if this is not set up properly. And I was lucky enough to speak to Jeff Gottelf as well, who's the author of the fantastic book, Lean UX, Sense and Respond. He's advised some enormous Fortune 500 US companies. He's a kind of stalwart on this. And he talks a lot about this intersection of people and how this works. And he talks about this concept that most executives in large organizations have been taught for 20 years to have all the answers. Okay, if you're a boss and you haven't got the answers, you're a failure at what you do. You've been taught at management school to be the oracle, the answer to this. And that's very hard to change that. And we all know that. You've got to respond to the market and user research and all those things. But a lot of executives have been brought up in this way of having the right answers. And that's very hard to battle against in a large organization. And again, what Jeff does to kind of mitigate that is to talk about all the time. So rather than the boss having the answers, the boss understands and knows what the team is working on, okay? What they're working on and why they're working on something. So rather than saying, hey team, build me a mobile app, the team are coming to the boss and saying, do you know what? We've seen this problem that people are exclusively moving towards mobile. We've got a website, we need to build an app. Here's why we're doing it. Here's what success criteria we think we're going to get. They're identifying the solution to a problem that the boss can help them figure out, and then over communicating with the boss. And again, when things go wrong in these organizations, Curtis from Delivery Hero said, misalignment is the biggest reason why a lot of teams fail in large organizations. The team think they're doing this thing, the boss thinks they're doing this thing, and the reality is they're doing something in between. They're pointed in slightly different directions. Communication being the big weakness to kind of get them to come together. And Curtis talks a lot about that in episode 4. And then generating ideas from across that organization means that there's a more democratic approach to where ideas come from. Ideas coming from the bottom versus coming from the top, from those executives who feel like they should have the answers. WordPress, certainly the ideas filter up from the team and from the bottom. All of their stuff comes from them, who their users are, and the team itself who are day-to-day working on WordPress. So this is episode number 2, really good one where I talked to Aaron, who's the design director at WordPress. And then I also spoke to Martin Eriksson, who leads the Mind the Product Tank community. He wrote a book on product leadership. And again, he talks a lot about this concept of aligned towards the same goal, heading the same direction, and focused on the same vision and mission. We saw that earlier on with those company bets. Everybody understands what those bets are, those strategic choices are. Everybody's pushing in that same direction. And that open communication across the organization helps push everybody in that right way. So when you're growing from a team of 3, 4, or 5, you can have those conversations with that team to do it. When you're a team of 20, a team of 100, a team of 1,000, a team of 5,000, this has to be shared and overly shared and communicated. Everybody's got to understand this, know this, so they're all moving in the same direction. And again, biggest weakness is when this doesn't happen. Biggest strength is when this does happen. That's when things go well, is when this is happening. When this isn't happening, things go wrong. Okay, then making that choice. How's it done? What is it? So they optimize for decision making at the Knot. And again, this is the latest episode. I've just launched this one, episode 10. What is that process for optimizing for decision making? How do they do that? And Selena's done that. And she's done that brilliantly in this episode. So I encourage you to go and have a look at it. But she talks about fuzziness, this feeling of, oh, I'm not quite sure about this. This doesn't feel right. Then you have to ask yourself, how can we learn about this to make a more better quality decision? All right. How can we get more certainty here? And she's got very good in her experience as a leader in sensing when fuzziness is there. And again, Aaron also talks about ideas that are not carried forward. Why are things not done? because maybe you need to hire a team of 20 people just to run it, but that's not, it doesn't mean it's not a great idea, but to hire 20 people to do that is going to cost you hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it. So often ideas get dropped or not taken forward because the team size, the cost of producing that is huge. What's also interesting at WordPress as well is they talk about this decision-making council they have at the top, made up of tech, business, design, and product, and those four ultimately make those high-level bets about where to take that organization next. Those high-level strategic choices are based on this group of people at the top. And again, there's lots of prioritization frameworks in terms of doing it. I think the framework is less important than the results that come from it. That's a definite takeaway that comes out of this. Everybody in the framework has to, everybody in the organization has to trust the framework that you use to do that. And again, overthinking is a problem. How can we act on this? We just got to get on and do and make that decision and ship something. And again, Selena talked about that at the knot as well. All right, the execution then. So I spoke to Harpal Singh in episode 3, and he's a veteran product coach. He's worked with hundreds and hundreds of startups and scale-ups. And his biggest piece of advice was to go on 80%. When you are ready to go, you've got your 80% there or 80% ready, go then. Don't get closer to 100%. Don't look for that pure ready to go. When you've got everything, you feel like you're mostly ready, go. Okay, don't stop. And this is where big organizations fail. They look to have 98, 100% certainty something's going to work. 80% is where you need to be. Startups, they go on 20, 30%. 80% is an optimum place. I think this does feel like a good idea. We've got the data, we've got the, right, let's just go. 80% feels good, we're off, let's do this. Harpal also talked about failure again. He reckons that 10 to 15% of new features will fail. That's normal, that's expected. He sets his team up for that. Those bets are going to fail in the future. Some of those things are going to fail 10 to 15% of the time. I personally think this is quite low. People have a higher rate, but again, 15% is something to work to in terms of this not being hugely, things are not going to work for you 15% of the time. Okay. And talking about that failure, Booking learns from its failures. There's value in that. What doesn't work. They have moratoriums, they have retrospectives, they analyze what doesn't work in terms of any of the bets that they make in terms of Booking.com. It's a huge part of what instructs what they do in the future is failure and expected failure in terms of that stuff as well. And Jeff, who wrote Sense and Respond, it's a continuous conversation with the market. Any decisions and choices you're making in executing something, it works, great. If it doesn't, oh well, keep speaking to them. Treat that as a conversation. Well, having a conversation with the market about that. If the market doesn't like it, let's try something else. It's a continual two-way dialogue you're having in terms of launching stuff that's out there. And again, around those regrets and those things when things go wrong as well, it's not recognizing if we ship V1 of something, the best thing that can happen is allow consumers going, well, this needs to be better. That's the best thing that can happen to a new feature launch. And I love the way that Selena talks about that at the knot, how their biggest that sounds like it could be a bad thing. It's, some people are launching, they're saying this must be better. That tells you you've got some product market fit. If people are outraged that it's not as good as it could be, that tells you you've got to invest time and work in doing it. So what might seem like a failure, kind of failure, really isn't for these organizations. It's a way of building to something in the future. Okay. That's my download to you. This is all still early days thinking. You've probably got that from me a little bit there as well. I'm going to start synthesizing this into, again, what I've been calling the secret sauce. And so here's some of the things that I think are important in terms of that. So for each organization is to gather a wide range of inputs, at least 2 of them, based on that decision diamond that I talked about. Work on a problem with your boss and work on the solution with the team. Okay. What problem are we solving? Defining the problem and then looking at what the solution might be in terms of doing that. Communicate, 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 talking all the time, sharing vision, initiatives, bets, whatever they might be, oversharing that all the time with everybody on the team. Expect to fail 15% of the time. Expect to just fail. It's going to happen to you. All right. Get over it. It's going to happen. Be prepared for it. British businesses are not very good at this. UK, British businesses are not good at failure. Americans, much better at it. Us Europeans are a little bit more nervous about it. And then finally, learn from your failures, move on, learn from them. And then again, keep communicating, communicate. That's the key to push this stuff forward. All right. That is a whistle-stop tour through what I'm talking about and where I am with a lot of the things that I'm doing with my book here. Okay. Any questions? Here's some more information about what I've got. Is my link to my podcast at the top there, my LinkedIn, my email, feedback. Give me some questions. If you've got any, give me some questions now. Anything.
Thank you so much, Joe. So, I mean, this is, to me, it's a very important subject in the sense that having run my business for 10 years, if I remember 10 years ago when I was reading books, not about this subject, but like self-help books kind of things, like what you're expecting, an answer in those books. Like, give me the answer. What do I need to do tomorrow? Give me the answer. Or how do I, it's not about how do I make better decision. It's more like, what is the right decision for me now? And like, you expect to find that in the books, and you have a plethora of books that are pretending to sell you these answers, like this is what you do next. But when you realize that actually all those answers are quite generic and they're not tailored to you or your company or your style or where you want to go. And this idea of creating a framework for decision making is extremely, extremely powerful and extremely important. It's like, I understand, and it really resonates in me, this idea of we need to get better at not having the right answer, just that's the process of making decisions.
Yeah, definitely. And asking the right questions to make that decision. You know, that's it, I think. And you look at, so when I spoke to Erin at WordPress, he said that, she said that what was interesting about that is she's read all of these business books about strategic decision making, and they don't really help you. They talk in depth about how Coca-Cola did this in the 80s and how Microsoft did this in the 90s and how Apple did this in the 2000s, but it doesn't help you. It's large corporations doing seemingly interesting things from the outside, but it's not a key approach or way of doing it. There's nothing in there to help you do that yourself. And that's
so there we have a really nice segue to our first question in that case. Thank you very much for that, because the same way that when we read those books about Coca-Cola or Apple, and we're like, okay, look, I can't relate to these companies. These are mammoth and they are completely different than who we are. The same way sometime when you read about booking.com or Spotify, you're like, look, yeah, they're startups. They qualify as startups, but really they are 20 steps ahead from where we are today as a startup. And I think one of the questions that was asked in the chat by Joe is, as a startup, when you're a solo founder and you don't have access to a sounding board, and you probably have a couple of mates, or you have Twitter, or you have LinkedIn, and you have a small community, you're not Spotify, you are literally the solo founder trying to build something new. How do you do it? How do you not make the right decision? Because we've learned here there's no right or wrong decisions, but it's more like, how do you gather more side of your diamond when you're a solo founder?
I mean, you have to do the work yourself. You have to do it. You have to make sure that, and there's things you can gather there in that diamond. You've got the gut feel. So founders always have that. And that's important for a startup. But you need to go and do the research with the market. You need to go and do some research, ask people what they need, mock up, do a prototype of your solution. Is this what you need? What's good and what's bad about this? You need to do the research to understand if that's going to be a winner for you. So you've got 2 points in that diamond. And the easiest one is just to do interviews with people. Data you haven't got, business drivers maybe you have. If you're doing market sizing or looking at the size of a market or looking at what competition are doing in that market, you're looking at the size of the opportunity there. You've got some business drivers up there as well, in terms of the metrics that are going to drive monetarily what you're trying to do. So I would, keep an eye on that money. Where's the money coming from? Are people prepared to spend that money on your solution? You've got the gut feel, go and do some customer research. Just go and ask people what they're doing and what they need. A lot of customer research is what you need to do early on to give you more confidence you're making the right choice. Advisors can't give you that. You could book an hour's call with me and I will tell you just to go and do some research with your customers. If anybody tells you that they've got the answers to what you're trying to do, they haven't. Your customers have got the answers to what you're trying to do, always. No expert ever has.
And if you're a solo founder and you're going to enter that realm of like trying to do custom interviews and all that, I've mentioned this book long enough now by Rob Fitzpatrick, like The Mom Test. Really short book, but for me that's a must read on how to do proper custom interviews. Like, definitely. I hope one day we'll
awful title, by the way, absolutely awful title.
Awful title, but amazing.
Awful title. You should not have done that as a title.
No, I think that's kind of like what got me to it.
Interesting things in it. Yeah. There's some other good stuff around looking at product market fit. I mean, the one I like the most in that regard is Lean Customer Development. This is a really solid book in terms of doing a lot of that work as well. This is really good in terms of build products your customers will buy. That's what you need. Okay. Exactly that. And this is a really good book. Go and get it. It's really strong on doing it, but doing it for a startup founder who's kind of, bootstrapping, really.
We have a ton of questions, so I'm going to pass a bit quickly. So have you noticed a shift towards embracing and talking about failure in the UK business scene? I'm French, so I can actually bounce on your comment about, oh, we British, we are very prude about failures or something like that. From my French point of view, from my French experience, I can actually tell you, you are so much better than what French people are. Like, failures in France is even more finger pointed than it would be in the UK. So I guess it's all what do you say? It's all based on like what's around you. But have you seen a change in the UK side?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, certainly within the startup scene, yes, but still they're very risk averse, UK startups to US startups. And I think risk is also associated with ambition. And I think what's interesting about US startups I talk with, like a UK startup, I talked to one this week, they're like, we want to hit a monthly, 12 a million monthly recurring revenue, £1 million, $1 million, that number. If I was talking to a US startup in exactly that same space, that number would be $5, $6, $7 million. They are US companies, not because of the market size or anything like that, but they set themselves higher goals and higher objectives, and they're more likely to get there. And so what happens if you are setting your goal at 6 million a month in recurring revenue, right? And you only get to 1, well, that's, it's not the end of the world. You've still got a million a month, but you're setting yourself higher, so you get higher on that risk-taking thing. That company is trying to get 1 million a month. They might get 100,000. They can't survive on 100,000. Do you see what I mean? Is they're setting their goals too low in terms of it. So it's a lot about goal setting, number one. The goals have got to be a lot bigger, and UK companies don't do that, startups especially. But it's also then about failure. So UK business is old. Basically, most UK businesses are hundreds of years old. The big ones, they're really old. They don't like risks anymore. They've gone through that period of growth. They don't like that risk anymore. And that filters down. So most of the UK executives have been brought up in large organizations that don't like risk. They want to maintain a steady path. We're going to keep doing it this way. We've got nothing to risk here. And so in the US, companies are a little bit younger. There's less regulation. So the risks are more in their DNA over there. So that's generally it. But yeah, I mean, UK companies definitely, their risk profile is increasing, certainly at larger scale. They are much more keen for that. People are not realizing that if they tie their career to a choice in a business, that means the end of their career if it doesn't work. It's definitely changing, but it's taking time to do it. And it's happening from the bottom with startups, but still there's very much a risk averse nature. It also comes from investors as well. UK investors are so much more risk averse than US investors, which is a real problem for investment in the UK.
I think it's the chicken and egg.
Very good, especially angels doing that.
It is the chicken and egg, whereby you don't maybe aim too high because you still want, like, you're playing with the fields of UK investors, which are much lower than US ones. But
yeah,
I mean, there's so many questions. I'm going to choose. So there's one. I think I know the answer, I would like to say, but basically, Effie's asking, most of the time you're going to have vision and gut feel, but people are not really good, or at least I presume small startups are resistant to do user research and terrible at collecting the right data. So is vision and gut feel enough to go ahead with a decision-making process?
Maybe some of them. You're just going to fail more often. That's simply it. The key to take and use the decision diamond is when anybody comes to you with an idea, you sketch out the decision diamond and say, great, you've got this one. You've got one of these 4 points. What have you got on the other 4 points here? What have you got on the other ones? And if they say, well, I haven't got anything there, and you're like, well, look, if we go ahead with just one of these points, there's a 90% chance of failure. If we get 2 of these points, there's a 70% chance of failure. You can just start to be honest with them about the risk of that. As soon as they understand that, oh, if we haven't got that, there's a less likelihood of us being successful. That's the simple conclusion to it. It's like, use the adage of poker again, and Effie, you've played poker many times, so you know this, that if you're sure, so you come with this gut feel idea, right, great, would you bet $2,000 on that right now? If I said to you, shake my hand, £2,000, that this is going to be a success, would you take that bet? And if they hesitate, you know that they don't think it's a sure thing. They don't think it's a sure thing. If they're not going all in on it, it can't be a sure thing. And I think what's interesting is this I love this book. This is by Annie Betts, Thinking in Bets. I'll share a video of this in the chat. It's brilliant about doing that. It's about making smarter decisions by understanding risk. And that's something that, again, has been a real focus of these questions. Risk is inherent in what you do. You've just got to mitigate that, understand what that risk is, and go into that with eyes open. If they don't want to use the data or the user research, it's because they think those two things might disagree with their idea. And they don't like that feeling, you know?
And to add on that, I think there's, whether that's missing from the diamond or whether like that has no place in the diamond, but on our side, when we work with startups and they come with us with that vision plus gut feel kind of feeling, there's one key element towards if we recommend to go ahead or not with the idea is how long and how much is it going to cost them to build the assumption. It's like, obviously, and try to find what is the cheapest way to answer the question. Like, always have those things as I'm trying to answer to ask a question to my customers here. Do you want that? So going back to your idea of the 80%, maybe when you go with just vision and gut feel, then your execution should be on 50% or 30%, which is like, look, we're going to build something extremely small. We're not going to waste a ton of money. And if the answer is there, then we're going to double down and actually extend that. But there's no need to, the more reassurance you have around your decision, obviously, the more you can actually invest. But you still accept that you may fail in the future, but the less reassurance you have, the less you invest, basically.
I mean, I think that's definitely it. You're completely right. And that's what the bid comes down to. That's the bet you're placing in that hand of poker is, you know, you're betting 50, 100,000 pounds on execution. If you think that's sure or not, that's basically what the bet is. And it's a classic bet. I think what's interesting about that book, Thinking in Bets, is I think, and back to this UK versus US thing, the UK, we think strategy is like a game of chess. Like, oh, move this, move that, move that. And this reality is not. Its strategy is a lot like hands of poker. You've got many hands of poker. One decision is not going to kill your company. 10 bad decisions is going to kill your company. And it's each hand of that poker game. You either grow or you don't grow, you know, and if you make good decisions, you'll grow over time. If you don't make good decisions in poker, you'll lose a lot of money. You know, it's simple as that. If you keep making bad decisions in poker, drop me an email, we'll play. I'm happy to play with you. You know? You kind of get the point. Think about each of these choices as a hand in poker. That's the way to think about what these bets are, not a game of chess.
Yeah. And I mean, I've got a couple of others. So I've got Huey here.
Just on timings, I'm happy to stick around till about 9:30, so I'm fine as well. If anybody else, if you do want to leave, I mean, obviously you're not going to walk out of a room here. But if you do want to go, you can. But we're going to keep going till about 9:30. If you're happy to, Nick, if you're still,
I'm happy with that. We're going to keep going, and all the questions will be in that case answered, and you can watch the videos replay afterwards. So all the answers all the questions will be answered there. But there is one about basically, UN says, is visa immigration service and support an interesting business field to consider and create a startup? Basically, I guess it's like, where do you come when you have to take a decision based on a certain market or a certain niche? Is that make our business an opportunity to cooperate with partners from other country? What should we pay attention if we are business in this? So again, how do I take the decision into, is this market the right market for me to go and invest my time and energy, I presume?
Yeah. I mean, simply, you've got the market sizing, what product market fit is, which is what you're looking for here. Looking for product market fit is if there's pain out there, which there is with visas. We all know that in crazy world that we live in right now. There's pain out there that people are suffering. Are they prepared to pay money to mitigate that pain? So would I pay you, a startup, to help me get my visa? You know, that's the question. And if the question is yes, the next follow-up question is how much would you pay for that service? Okay. And there's almost certainly immigration consultants everywhere in the world that charge you to do these things. Benchmark your services against them. You know, what is it you're offering? And how, you know, what can, in terms of who you can, you know, of already who's out there in terms of the services that you've got. And then that leads you quite into the next partner. From the partner alongside that is they're the people to approach. So visa and immigration processes, I'm guessing, is very manual, very human based. There's an opportunity, there's a cost there with some software that you could build to make that process easier. They would be your natural partners, would be the people that are already dominant in that. They've already got customer acquisition and customers. They probably need help streamlining what they're doing. That would be a natural fit for your for a partnership. Another partnership would be to look at some of the organizations that look at company relocation internationally, look for partnerships there. Where are customers coming from for visas? What's their end goal? What's part of that? Is it company relocation? Partner with them. Where are your customers coming from? Who has customers that are your targets? They should be your partners. Who's got that audience? Because what you need now as a startup is you've got ideas, you've got technology, all that stuff. What you haven't got is audience. That's what startups are always missing. That's the biggest piece of that pie. The biggest mistake they make is they've not got audience. Find partners that have got audience. You build the product, they bring the audience. That's a perfect synergy right there.
Wow. There was, I think I've read somewhere, there was some hustling around actually visa and immigrations in certain countries like China, for example, where you find hustlers that are like, they have their own small startup stand basically in the street to help you with the visa going on in the visa system going on in China or something like that. So maybe there's something in that, like, look where the hustlers are, and if there is enough of a bigger hustler market, then maybe there is something up for disruption.
Follow the money. Wherever the money is, that's where you want to be, really. I think definitely.
We got Sari. So our business decisions are powered by gut feel of C-suite. How do we start a healthy conversation to move us towards the diamond? Well,
it's a difficult one, and it's one I come across all the time. And you've got those classic executives who've been taught at management school to have all the answers. That's where they're coming from. That's why they're coming to you with gut feel about what they should do next. The next time this happens to you, sketch out the diamond right there and say, great, I love that idea, because it probably is a good idea. You don't know for sure. Don't ever try and shoot the idea down, because you'll get nowhere. Love that idea. Sketch the diamond, right? Just sketch it out there right in front of them on a whiteboard, on a Miro board, on a piece of paper. You saw the one I just drew on a piece of paper. That's the first time I sketched it out in a meeting. That's the first time I did it. Sketch it out on a piece of paper and say to them, look, here's where you are with your idea. Have we got this? Have we got quantitative research? Have we got data? Have we got something else? Have we got business insight that means that it's something that's going to work for us? What's the size of the market? Put all of those 4 things together, but just sketch it out and just say to them, look, for you to get more certainty, we need 4 of these. What 4 of these have you got right now? How can we get more of these to make sure this idea is going to be a good one? How can we take this forward? Because again, what C-suite want you to hear, from you is, yeah, I think that's a great idea. How can we bring that into action? All right. Or prove that it's not a great idea, which is what you're thinking. Well, this sounds like a bad idea, but you need to get to a position where you can prove that it's a bad idea. Right? And you need the research and the data to be able to do that. You can't just disagree with them, because you're never going to win that battle. So you've got to talk to them about getting certainty, getting more insight. To take that idea forward, you've got to do the research and get the data to get there. You've got to find sources to collect both of those things. If you're not doing that, your business is not going to be very successful. You're going to win far fewer of these bets. You really are. These bets are not going to help you get there. You're going to win less bets.
And I guess to add on Sari's question and onto your answer, I guess that's where one of the multiple parallels of business and poker starts to play again. It's like you also have a huge element of reading the room, or like knowing the person in front of you, and the business decision and the diamond and all that is helping you making the decisions. But if you have to sell that decision to someone above you, like as a C-suite, that needs to be talked in a certain way. Maybe you make the decisions using the diamond, but you still have to sell it in a different way to that person above that doesn't want to hear about the diamond. They want to hear something exciting, something powerful, whatever that is. Okay. You have to play the person in front of you, basically.
So true. And you've got to understand what pushes their buttons. So most people have got things that push their buttons. Is it stories? Is it data? What is it? If it's a financial director, it's money. If it's what is it? What are the things that push their buttons in terms of the way you talk about it? I love that Nick talked about that. Figure out what that is and just talk to them in their language, and you'll get there a bit more, really.
It's another sales practice, isn't it? So you got Gary, as a product design consultant, I sometimes felt the need to help clients make their business decision, especially startups. Yay, welcome. This may be seen as outside my remit, but them making the right decision is important for the project, and therefore so to me. How would you suggest I approach that? I will have an answer to that, but yeah, please go for it. Joe.
I think we're going to have the same answer. I mean, you can't. The two are the same thing. A startup, the product is the business is the product. They're not separate things. If they've got a bad business strategy, they're going to have a bad product strategy. Simple as that, and you've got to tackle that. The way I approach that is, if I think they've got a bad business strategy, I'll prod that asking the right questions. And back to that again, there's ways you can test if that you can do the bet. Would you bet £10,000 that this is going to be successful? Back to Nick's point about how much it's going to cost to do this. Okay, it's going to cost you this much to do it. How confident are you you're making the right choice here? And if they're not confident, then you need to go back to basics of figuring out what a business strategy should be in terms of that. Bit out of the remit of what I can talk about here, but that I can, if you send me an email, Gary, I can give you some reading to have a look at how that can work in terms of it. There's lots of approaches to create a business strategy, from various canvases to various processes, but it's not rocket science. It's not hard. And I think to be successful in your career as a design consultant, you need to understand business. Okay, it's not about the design at the end of the day. It is, but if the design could be amazing, but if the business is awful, it's not going to go anywhere. Really not.
And it's all done when we as service business, like we work with clients that have lots of those startups have an idea, or they need to make a decision about like one new feature or something like that. I think it's key to understand. There's two things that are key to understand. Is one, we're never going to be as passionate as they are about their product. Like we are passionate about what we're building, but we are not the driver of the business. At the end of the day, one person is in charge of making a decision, and this is down to the product owner. This is not us making the decision. The only thing we can do as a partner is to is to help them asking the right questions. It's like they may act on a gut feel. They may act on a, hey, competition is doing this, I think we should do that, which is basically copy like A for B what they are doing. Yeah. So we just need to ask the right question based on everything we have in front of us. And for us, it's very easy to access the data. It's very easy to access like everything they need to make the decisions. And sometimes especially when you work with small startups, like when they have 1-2 founders, a small team, they don't have enough bandwidth to do everything that is needed in order to take the right decision. So again, we are only here to help them put in front of them the evidence that they will need to make sure to reassure them that the decision is correct or wrong. We have sometime in the past said, look, we think that this is the wrong decision. Like, are you sure you want to go through there? If you really want to test this idea, let us find a way to do it extremely simply. Like, look, how about instead of doing the whole shebang of this whole feature that will send 20 emails and do these things, what about we start with just like a button to notify us if they want these things or something like that. Let's start small, because really your gut feeling is that this is the next best thing since sliced breads. Our gut feeling is that actually people will not want that. Please let us be wrong, but in a way that is not going to cost you 20 grand to do that, because I would much rather personally spend 20 grand on a feature that will actually progress your business, and I don't think this is the right one. They are very hard conversations to have, but once you have those conversations, you can be right or wrong. The question is not around who's right or wrong. I think the question is around how you're seen from your client, and you're seen as a partner more than just an executioner of like, I'm going to do one taught kind of thing.
And I think it's back to that point that I think Jeff Gothels makes in the podcast is, it's the conversation with the market is what you're having here. You're having a conversation. Do you like this? Oh, great. Let's do more of it. Fantastic. What more do you want? Oh, it's an ongoing conversation you're having with the market. It's not like build a massive thing, throw it out there. Fingers crossed this is going to work, and it doesn't work. That's not a conversation. That's a broadcast. That's a different thing. Okay. Conversations are more successful because you're getting continual feedback about what you're doing. And that meets quite nicely to Tony's question here about pricing. In the previous answer, you briefly mentioned that will people pay for this? Can you give any insight on how these companies make decisions on what to charge for their product? Yes. You can only do this live in the market, okay? You cannot do customer research about how much people will pay for a product. It simply doesn't work, okay? People are not very good at predicting their own behavior when it comes to money. Yeah, I definitely spend $100 on that. They won't, okay? People are not very good at doing that. You need to be experimenting with pricing all the time, okay? Putting it up, bringing it down, all the way through, experimenting with your pricing until you hit a point which is a sweet spot for you, where you're getting as many customers as you need, churn is lower, but you've got to keep experimenting with pricing. Pricing is never finished. It's never finalized. It's never the end, okay? Unless you're a Netflix or a Spotify, you've got to continually be testing pricing all of the time to see if people are going to pay for this. And alongside that pricing, what features are the features that people value for that money, okay? Simple as that. All right, what are the things that people want? For something like Spotify, it's easy because it's no ads. But again, not everybody wants to pay for that. So it's as simple as understanding that. And it's all about experimentation live in the market. It's the only way you're going to get pricing information correctly. I would love to be proved wrong about that. I'd love to have a secret sauce for figuring out pricing. The only one I've ever seen that's successful is live market testing in terms of just altering it and measuring if that's successful or not.
Yeah. And for me, when we talk about pricing and we talk about, again, going back to decision making and pricing and everything, one of the questions I've started to love over the years, when we do the kind of like customer research, or even when we, in our head, we're just sketching what the customer may look like, we try to, how are they solving the problem that you're trying to solve right now? 9.9%, 9.9 times out of 10 is not a new problem. Like it's very rare that we find the startups that are solving a new problem. So it's like, how are they solving the problem today? How painful is that solving at the moment for them? So let's talk about Spotify for the moment. Spotify, the problem that you're trying to solve is I want to have access to unlimited music all the time with me in my pocket, kind of thing. How are the people not using Spotify solving the problem today? Before that, they were probably using LimeWire to download tons of MP3 somewhere, and like sometimes they would have viruses on the computer, sometimes they would have bad MP3, sometimes they would have to store them, then lose because they buy a cheap MP3 key or something like that, and then you lose all your collections. Like this is how they're solving the problem, and the pain here is the time it takes in order to get access to all this collection. This is how we like to think when we talk to startups and decisions. Is like, okay, you're trying to solve a problem here. Don't think about your solution for the moment. Like your solution for the moment has nothing to do in that discussion. It's like just understand how are they solving the problem today, because it could well be that actually they just spend 5 minutes every month to solve a little thing, and that we never pay £9 a month to solve those 5 minutes, because actually it's only 5 minutes for them. So yeah, that's my take on that.
We could talk for an hour on this.
It looks like
it's a whole conversation about pricing. It's a hard one.
Cool. Look, thank you very much for your time, Joe. I think it's going to be time to wrap up. I was entering a couple of questions on the chat because we were supposed to have a stand up with the team now, but like I'm very much enjoy that conversation.
Yeah, thanks for organizing this. Amazing. Thank you.
No, please, thank you very much. I mean, we have an event every 2 weeks. So for those who have done here until the end for that nearly an hour conversation, thank you very much. We will be back, so not next week, but the week after. And in the meantime, if you want to follow Joe, obviously Joe's podcast, Joe's website, Joe's LinkedIn, Joe's is everywhere.
Yeah,
basically,
LinkedIn's probably the best place at the moment. I've dropped my email in there as well. If you've got any more questions,
And on our side, if you want to follow what's going on in the smart cookies, then you can head to cookieshq.co.uk/events. And then here you will see like all the futures events, all the past events, and have access to like all the videos on YouTube and everything. These videos should probably hit YouTube like in about a couple of hours, so probably by the end of the day. Right. Thank you so much, Joe. And then
thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. You take care. You have a very good day.